Here are the main flaws in this argument. The biggest flaw is that is 20% really a paltry figure that the author has just shrugged it off? Just because 20% sounds a small number does not mean that the condition here is not significant. 20% of the workforce is protesting against the working condition. This is serious. The author sounds very hasty in writing off just because the 20% is a small number. The situation is a lot more serious. And does not protesting amount to not being dissatisfied? 20% people are protesting. 20% people, I would say, may symbolize the overall work conditions. The other 80% people, while they continue to work, they may still not be satisfied about the work conditions. Is 70% a good enough number to indicate that the working conditions are satisfactory? The author has rested his argument on this survey. Now 70% people say that, okay, positive feedback. So what about the other 30% people? Is 70% really a good enough number to indicate the conclusion that the author has come up to? In other words, I would say 30% people are not satisfied. 30% of your workforce is not satisfied. It has given a negative feedback or a non-positive feedback in a survey. So I don't think this result can be taken so positively as the author has taken it. Then 70% of participating workers gave positive feedback. Of those who participated, 70% gave positive feedback. But how many actually participated? What if only 20% of the entire workforce participated? What if the people who are really dissatisfied ignored this survey? So in that case, the survey may not be giving the overall condition, overall sentiment of the workforce. Then the internal survey could give a false sense of positivity. The author has not given any concrete data suggesting what the output was, just saying that positive feedback, it is something quite subjective. And author has not suggested much about the neutrality of the survey. Spending more money than spent in last 3 years is all relative rather than absolute. What if in those 3 years the conditions were very bad, money spent was minuscule, and although the money spent in the last 3 years was more than that spent in the 3 years before them, and even if the money spent last year was significantly more, the money may still be inadequate compared to what needs to be spent. Drawing the conclusion that there is no significant scope for improvement suggests that the author is biased towards one side. Work conditions are subjective. It is quite strong to reach a conclusion where you say that there is no scope for improvement or there is no significant scope for improvement. These are very strong conclusions to make, and coming to this conclusion is quite hasty. The author seems to have a bias towards a particular conclusion. So these are the main flaws that lie in this particular reasoning. If you can identify around 5 of these flaws, I would say that would be a very healthy number. So have a nice introduction to begin with, where you very clearly tell your stand. The stand in AWA should always be that the argument is not convincing. Tell it always in the first paragraph that you're not convinced with the argument. Then suppose you have identified 5 flaws, so write 5 flaws here. Okay. Have a new paragraph for each flaw. However small the paragraph may be, have a new paragraph every time for a new error, a new flaw that you find out, and then have a conclusion clearly suggesting that on the basis of the aforesaid reasoning by you, the argument is not convincing. Okay, so this would be the structure of a convincing essay. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching.